All right, looks like it is time for us to get started. First, I want to thank you all so much for joining us. And if you would please take a look at your screen. We're going to do some check-ins here just to make sure that you have functionality with Adobe Connect. You'll see at the top left-hand corner of your screen a figure of a person with their hand raised. If you want to practice raising your hand, that way if you have any questions that we need to answer for you, we can make sure we do that. Excellent, thanks Jacqueline. All right, and then you're going to want to hit that picture one more time to put your hand back down. Great. Again, you can see that on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a chat box for all of us to participate in. So please do feel free to launch some questions at us. Rody and I are here to make sure that we maximize your time today. So if you do have questions as they arise, we will do our best to get back with you and answer those for you. And I'm going to make an assumption that everyone can see our lead screen here. It says PBL Lead. And if you're having any difficulties seeing the screen, you can go ahead and send us a note so that we can try and help you get connected. If you do have any technical difficulties with our webinar today, I do want to remind you that our webinars are archived and they're available for viewing on our BIE YouTube channel. So our focus for today is PBL leadership. It's all about how school leaders can support project-based learning. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Cruz, and I'm a member of the national faculty with the Buck Institute for Education, or BIE. I've worked in public ed for many years now as a teacher, central office administrator, and for just over 10 years as a school principal. I'm working with one of my colleagues today, so I'm going to take a moment to allow him to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. It's nice to see so many participants from all over the planet, actually. My name is Rody Boonchouy. I'm a school principal for a middle school and a high school in Davis, California. We're a new tech school in year 9 of implementation, so I am excited to be working with you and sharing some of our lessons learned as leaders of project-based learning sites. So our webinar today focuses on the role of school leaders in supporting the implementation of project-based learning. You may be thinking of school leaders as principals and vice principals, but what we can see from our participants, there are a variety of leaders in education, including teachers. So welcome to you all, and the content of this webinar is relevant regardless of your role. Also, just to underscore the nature of a webinar, we're going to move at lightning speed here. Both Jen and I speak quickly, but there's a lot of content to cover. We're all very busy people, so we're going to move fast. And if we move fast and you have a question, please do not hesitate to type in the chat box down there. So while I'm speaking and you have a question, Jen can answer any questions you might have and vice versa. Okay, so the driving question for this webinar is, how can we lead a process of change that ensures the effective implementation and sustainability of project-based learning? A lot of terms in there, a lot of constructs in there, but over the next 35 minutes, we're going to be focusing on this driving question, and hopefully the topics that support this driving question will be applicable and relevant to your programs. Some of the need to knows that we have identified to answer this driving question include the following. What does effective PBL look like? How do I as a school leader use the elements of PBL for instructional innovation? In what ways does PBL align with my other initiatives at my school that might be particularly relevant in your context? How can I as a school leader support teachers at various stages of PBL implementation? We all know there's a range of practice in our classrooms. And what tools can I use to check our progress along the way? If you have any other need to knows, please don't hesitate to include them in the chat box down in the bottom right-hand corner. Okay, very quickly, BIE, Buck Institute for Education, is a 25-year-old nonprofit organization based in Northern California, and BIE's claim to fame is that they focus on one thing, and that is project-based learning. and particularly within 3 domains, and that includes research. What does a project-based learning look like in the classroom? What data have we collected, and how has the methodology been implemented over the last decade? Production of materials and professional development. We provide professional development to 10,000 plus teachers a year. Looks like we may have lost Jen there. I'll pick up from here. So the million-dollar question at this point is how do we best educate our students for the future? So educators, business leaders, and community members tend to agree on the skills and knowledge that graduates need. They tend to disagree on the best way to produce that kid. From our viewpoint, from our experience, we say project-based learning is the best vehicle for supporting students. The problem with PBL in our view is that most people confuse the idea of a project with PBL. So project-based learning uses authentic learning tasks to drive the instruction. The project is the main course, not the dessert at the end. It is not an experience that is tacked on to the end of your traditional curricular unit. So this shift in instructional thinking presents a significant change for some of our stakeholders, including ourselves. So why PBL? There's a few reasons. First, project-based learning is a natural instructional fit with the Common Core state standards that most of the country has adopted. I think looking at the locations from where some of you are tuning in from, you're experiencing the rollout of PBL as well, or Common Core, excuse me.
All right. So when we talk about project-based learning, we say that using a project-based approach can increase the rigor of instruction in your school and district. It really supports building 21st century skills such as critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. And this approach really works naturally with students at all levels, from students with disabilities to kids that are academically gifted. However, what I've found is that many teachers have been required to teach from Basel textbooks for many years, or have been ingrained in thinking of themselves as content experts. So moving into this more advanced pedagogical approach can present a pretty significant change for many teachers. So some of the portions of our webinar today are going to be addressing that change that some of your faculty and also some of your community may be experiencing, and also specifically, how can we support that instructional transition?
So you may have heard of a few models of project-based learning. At BIE, we have defined PBL by 8 essential elements that you can see in this visual below. Now we don't have time to go into detail regarding each of these elements in the context of project-based learning. What we're going to focus on is how these elements define an approach to leadership within a project-based learning school. So in other words, BIE encourages or promotes a leadership paradigm that uses the elements of project-based learning as a leadership style. And what we'll do is we'll look at each of these individually in the context of a project-based learning leader. And by the way, if you're interested in more details regarding what these elements look like in a PBL classroom, feel free to check out the BIE YouTube channel for PBL essential elements. We're going to be looking at these under the assumption that most leaders of a PBL school know these elements, but we're going to talk about them from the framework of leadership. So the first piece is significant content. In many of our states, the content would be the Common Core standards or your state standards. For a leader, significant content is understanding the ins and outs of project-based learning. The basics of the methodology would include project design. That is, how do we design, develop, and build a project using backward planning methods. Management, how do we manage a classroom that's highly collaborative, that focuses on complex problem solving and is inquiry based. And how do we assess? Assessment tends to be a significant question that many educators have for PBL. For us, it's important as leaders to understand what it means to design, manage, and assess a project-based learning program. The 21st century skills would be similar to the 21st century skills we promote in the classrooms. So that typically involves critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. How do we promote those skills within students? For us as leaders, we need to promote those skills as well. So how do we create a learning environment, a professional learning environment that supports collaborative leadership, adaptive leaders, being able to express your intentions and possibilities clearly. To be a 21st century leader requires that we're able to support a shared leadership model and adapt given the unique context and circumstances of our sites. In-depth inquiry. So in-depth inquiry for students in a PBL classroom focuses on deep investigations, asking questions, using data to make informed decisions. Well, we expect the same type of experience for our professional learning community as well. So how do we create a culture of inquiry within our PLC? In a strong culture of inquiry, we're asking questions to understand students and to understand learning. This is also infused in the school's approach to professional development. Instead of taking part in sit and get workshops, teachers conduct action research. Some of you may have experience with that. Or participating in lesson studies and having time with your instructional support staff to design inquiry-based projects with colleagues. Professional development tends to be teacher-directed, learner-centered, collaborative, and with an emphasis on critical analysis. At my school, we have professional development rotations. So during our staff collaboration, teachers are responsible for supporting each other's learnings and understanding and doing analyses of student work. How do we create that culture of inquiry within our professional community the same way we expect it to be developed within our classroom? The driving question. We all know that a project-based learning unit includes a driving question. This gives purpose to the learning experience. So every time a student raises his or her hand and asks, why are we doing this? We can ask, because it's all scaffolds, all lessons, all learning experiences should be tied to this overarching driving question. So us as leaders, a school should be organized around a question that captures the issue, problem, or challenge for students to address. Framing the school's program as answering a question emphasizes the fact that PBL school is about promoting inquiry as part of our culture. So for example, we have a driving question at my site every year. This year, our driving question is, how do we promote deeper learning through design and facilitation? How do we promote deeper learning through design and facilitation? And as our program evolves, so does our driving question. For us at a PBL school in year 9, we're focusing on our efforts beyond superficial implementation of a new methodology and really trying to dig deep into creating a rigorous learning experience for students where we emphasize critical thinking. So therefore, our driving question is, how do we promote that deeper learning? And every staff collaboration, every meeting we have should revolve around that focus. The other element to PBL and to PBL Lead is creating a need to know. So this is a key concept in PBL. So the driving question sets the stage and sets the broader direction, and the need to knows are the concrete next steps to help us in our own learning towards that driving question, or in our learning towards a response to that driving question. So we spend staff meetings on analyzing design and interactions. The specific objectives that we need to address to be effective in answering the driving question are our need to knows. These are the concrete next steps. Voice and choice, very important to engage students. So how do we provide opportunities for voice and choice within our staff? This is about shared inquiry, shared leadership, and empowerment. We value the expertise and leadership ability of the team. So how do we elicit ideas? How do we ensure that we value, honor, and recognize the expertise within our team, so that we own the program? This, as opposed to it being a top-down initiative, how do we rely on the experience and expertise of our team to define our direction and our vision? By providing shared leadership opportunities, we can make this happen. Revision and reflection, very important, and I think the key piece here is reflection. So as a staff, if we're planning on rolling out a new instructional methodology, and we plan to have it become a cohesive, school-wide, coherent instructional methodology such as project-based learning, there are going to be bumps in the road. That's just the nature of any change. So what opportunities do we build into our experience and into our learning community where we can stop, check in, and reflect on progress? How are we doing? Where do we struggle? Where are we succeeding? How do we provide opportunities for that type of discussion and dialogue so we can learn from each other's experiences? It's important for students to have opportunities for revision and reflection when moving through a PBL unit. How do we create those experiences within our own PLC? And finally, the last element is a public audience. So for students in a PBL classroom, typically these projects culminate in some type of presentation, and we invite as many outsiders as possible to up the stakes for the experience. Well, what does a public audience mean for us as leaders? And in my mind, the way I understand this is that it's time in the 21st century to do what we can to kick down the walls between school and community. How do we develop relationships? How do we develop partnerships with institutions of higher learning? We have a university in town that we have a partnership with local government, with community organizations, with industry, with business organizations, so that we have allies in the community to support the learning experience. In PBL, the experience is very real world and relevant. So by formulating these relationships, we have all kinds of opportunities for internships for our students, for bringing in guest speakers, for bringing in panelists, and honestly, for the political capital it builds to have relationships in the community that support the type of learning that's happening in your school.
So Rody went through and spoke about some of the different leadership behaviors that you would be demonstrating at your site, at your district, if you were moving forward with a project-based learning implementation. If you have any questions for him about those 8, I know that he rolled through them quickly so that we can keep on moving here in our webinar, but please do feel free to put your questions down in our chat if you have any. I'm going to talk with you about change, because change and the change forces at work are one of the pieces that can derail a really effective and really important project-based learning implementation at your school site. And we all know that it's tough to lead and manage innovation and change, mainly because change can happen physically in our world, but our mind might not make that shift. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about the role of the leader a little bit differently. We're going to talk about our responsibilities as a leader to help people manage a change. So I want to give you an example here that if you've ever moved, away from your hometown, if you've experienced a new supervisor, or you've seen how folks respond to the adoption of new curriculum materials, you've seen change take place. And although there were some physical changes that happened, you have probably experienced that some folks get stuck, so to speak, and they can have a hard time transitioning into our new way of instructional practice. So as our school leader, again, we are going to have that responsibility to support our staff and sometimes support our community as we move through instructional change and innovation. Now, I'm going to apologize to you for my slide. It got a little bit mixed up there. But one of our most important things that we can do as a school leader is create demand. So this is all about creating demand. There are a few different strategies you can use as a leader to help create demand. One of the most important strategies I've used to help create demand for an instructional innovation is to provide data that shows our current reality. How are students truly performing, and where do we need to get these kids? So having that dialogue as an entire faculty to ensure that we have that shared vision, that common purpose, helps create demand. Now, teacher leaders actually make a significant difference when we're creating demand for change. If you have a teacher or staff member that's an early adopter and is willing to try implementation of project-based learning, that can really go a long way towards helping other staff members have a successful vicarious experience. That's another really important way to help create demand. I often take my teachers for field trips so that they can go and see what project-based learning looks like, so that they can have it in their mind. They've got that picture, they know what to do, and they can picture themselves doing it. So, I can't impress upon you how important a vicarious experience is for teachers as we're trying to create demand for change. Why is it so tough to lead and manage innovation and change in our lives and organizations? Well, experience and research has taught us that some of the most significant barriers to successful leadership of change are just normal human resistance, pressure of day-to-day events. There are scarce resources sometimes competing for your interest or your time. There could have been an inadequate planning process. There might be incomplete information or changing circumstances. And so all of those pieces kind of come together to create different kinds of change forces at work. Now, I'm making an assumption that for most of us as in school leader roles, that you are familiar with change theories, working with either Cotter's change theories or maybe Marzano and Tim Waters. So we're going to talk about change, though, as first order and second order change. First order changes are easily accepted and they don't cause emotional upheaval. You've had these kinds of changes at your school or work site when you've made a small tweak to something that just made the operation more efficient so that you could move on to kind of harder to get to changes to make. Now, these terms, first order and second order change, are used in Marzano and Waters' work in School Leadership That Works, and you can find more information about it through McCrell if you are interested. Second order change is probably where most of us that are working in a building that's transitioning from a more traditional type of instructional practice into a project-based learning practice are going to find yourselves. You're going to probably find yourself in the middle of a second order change. This kind of change causes cognitive dissonance and it requires transition management. When people experience second order change, as that school or site leader, we need to constantly communicate expectations and create structures that are going to help support their growth. It's difficult to figure out which changes will be first order and which will be second order, although some administrators I've spoken with believe that veteran staff experiences many changes as second order. That really hasn't been my experience. I find that it's more a mindset to each individual person rather than related at all to how much time they've been teaching. I have some faculty who have been at work for 30 plus years and they are early adopters. And then I have some folks who are second year teachers and they are just digging in their heels. So I would say that this is more of a mindset than a veteran status issue. Now, transition versus change. So transition is actually the psychological process where people come to gradually accept the situation and the changes that come with it. So while change can be fast, like moving or like bringing in those new curricular materials, transition can be really slow. Now, if you take a look at this slide, it shows you one way to look at how people move through a transition. And a terrific resource for considering how transition impacts people is William Bridges' book, Managing Transitions. Many of you have probably seen that. And as you look at this process, it probably also kind of reminds you of the grief process. And that is actually a process that many people experience as they are moving through a change. Jansen refers to it as the four-room apartment model of transition. And so you can see that as people are going through these various stages, there are some things that we can do to help them. And one of the biggest things that we can do as a leader to support people through a significant transition is to be over communicative. We can't communicate enough what is expected, what things should look like, and make sure that you are communicating and communicating over and over again. That's a very important component. And also to make sure that you put in writing what the transition needs to look like. So what exactly is it that you're expecting to see from your staff? The more explicit you can be the more likely the staff is to do what's expected. How can you avoid some of the pitfalls others have experienced when moving to PBL in your school? First, you can talk with others about their experiences in implementation of big change initiatives. So throughout your career, you've seen significant change initiatives come and go. And so what were the big pieces of learning there? It's important to avoid pitfalls by being reflective about your own context. So what pitfalls might exist for you? We have a very specific communication structure that has evolved in an attempt to avoid some pitfalls. We also have identified specific teacher leaders that staff can go to as they have questions and are experiencing some of those harder transition times. And we've actually created a team of teacher leaders that helps other teachers transition, including a team that just brings people together purposefully to do celebrations, just to make sure that we maintain everyone's well-being. Now, to successfully manage this transition, we talked about a couple of things, but do make sure that you continue to refer back to your school or your system's mission, vision, and values and beliefs. Really important. You are going to have to probably provide some intellectual stimulation for your staff, so give them some articles. The BIE website has some great resources for you to do some short articles and have some discussions surrounding what should PBL look like and why would you do it. We need to keep having those conversations. Probably can't talk about it enough. Let's think about how are you going to monitor this. Now, we're not talking about monitoring it in terms of being punitive, but we know that what gets monitored gets done. So what types of monitoring strategies can your team use to make sure that we continue to move the PBL implementation forward at your school site? This is probably what implementing PBL feels like to some portion of your staff. It might be a second order change, and so you really do need to honor that perspective. I actually spend quite a bit of time throughout the day as we're beginning this process to talk with people. Just make sure that I was getting out into classrooms and just listening to them and having that open door. It was truly important. We also came to some agreements as a staff regarding what would I see at what points in time. So what would we see during the first semester of implementation? What would we see during the first year, during the second year? And then I would listen to teachers as that process was going, and we would make agreed upon changes. You could not opt out. That was not one of our agreed upon changes. There was no backing out of something that we had agreed to do. But we did make some shifts to make sure that everyone was comfortable with what we were doing.
Okay, thank you, Jen. And I want to reinforce her message that change theory and leading change is critical if you're considering the rollout of project-based learning, particularly if it's a school-wide initiative or effort. It's easy to talk about the different tools and practices and what they should look like in the classroom, in a project-based learning classroom. But as is human nature, it's very difficult to make a deep and meaningful transition from an old schema to something completely different, such as project-based learning. So feel free to chat any questions you have to in the chat box to Jen regarding that. It's something that we have found over many years to be critical in any effort that requires a change in the way we do business. So there are some tools you can use to evaluate your school's progress towards quality PBL implementation, and we're just going to discuss two very briefly. One is a gap analysis, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this. And a gap analysis is an excellent way to analyze the current reality of your program. What does the culture look like? What does instructional practice look like? What does the vision look like, and so forth? And then to brainstorm your ideal vision of a project-based learning or a 21st century school. So a gap analysis is something that we encourage. You can do a Google search online and find gap analysis protocols very easily. But what it does is it provides an opportunity for us to build a vision of what we want our program to look like and to take a look at what our program actually does look like now. And then to create actionable concrete next steps to evolve what our reality is into our vision. Another protocol or another exercise that's great for leadership is a SWOT analysis. SWOT, S-W-O-T. Another familiar exercise for some of you. And this is a tool that I like to use first as an administrator and then with my school leadership team. This tool supports deep reflection about the current reality of your school. So first you consider the goal that you established in regards to PBL. But once you've articulated your vision or goal in the center, begin with your strengths. What are the strengths of our program and of our team that can support this vision? What are the weaknesses, perhaps? What opportunities are available? Are there organizations or assets in the community that would be likely to support the rollout of project-based learning? And what are the threats? Threats can be political. Threats can be other initiatives or competing statewide initiatives or local initiatives. If we're able to brainstorm and identify our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in regards to the implementation of project-based learning, we have an idea of the map, of the landscape that we're working with. And you, more than anyone, has a big picture of your community and context, but it's good to outline those and write down what should we be capitalizing on and what should we be prepared to face. Now, most school administrators are big picture people, so it's important to have a concrete plan in place to purposely support PBL implementation. What we've been talking about over the last 30 minutes is very theoretical, very abstract, but then there's a point where we have to operationalize these theories so that there's clarity on the ground, so teachers know what to expect and what rollout's going to look like. So let me speak to my implementation at my site right now. We're a new tech network school. Some of you may have heard of this. This is a reform organization that redesigns schools using project-based learning as the primary methodology. And so our implementation plan required a significant transformation of several aspects of our structure in our school. One, and this question came up in the chat box just a little while ago, is a concerted effort to build a strong culture of professionalism and community. So when we change schools, which is a highly, highly difficult proposition, we have to begin with a culture. So how do we prepare teachers and students, our parents, our families, our school families, to make a shift away from something that is very old and very traditional to something that is new and maybe a little scary. So we build a we have a focus effort on building a culture of transparency, of trust, of respect, of professionalism towards that common purpose, which is the second piece. How do we build a common vision using all our stakeholders that emphasizes 21st century skills? When everyone within our community is on board with the development of skills such as critical thinking, communication, collaboration, it's easier to adopt and adapt to project-based learning as an instructional methodology. And the other piece would include the structures of your school. Like some of the questions in the chat box, you want to have classroom environments that accommodate space for collaboration. If we want students to collaborate, they need to sit at tables or sit in spaces that have students facing each other so that they can be prepared to work in teams. We need bell schedules if you're at the secondary level that are conducive to PBL. 52-minute period blocks or 52-minute periods are much too short for meaningful collaboration and work on projects. How can you build in new structures such as block periods, for example? And also important, and this is going to come a little bit later in the webinar, how do we build in structures to allow for teacher collaboration so they can work together in designing projects and to bounce ideas off of each other?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about alignment. As you are bringing in project-based learning to your school, or if you are refining project-based learning, it's important for you to consider, how does PBL align to your other school initiatives? Your staff will need to draw some clear connections. Make sure that you are, in some cases, actually having your staff make graphic organizers that help demonstrate the alignment between some of the initiatives that you're working towards. Be sure to talk about the Common Core state standards if you're in a Common Core state standard state. And also talk about those PARC assessments or the Smarter Balanced Consortium that are on the way. Also, many of our new reading series that we're adopting at the elementary level now have significant themes in them where we can very easily build a project-based learning unit from that material. So be explicitly looking for, how does my work align? You will need to be very clear about explaining that to staff. And one of the things that I've also tried to do for alignment is to be sure to honor the fact that teachers need time. As we are moving towards implementing a new instructional methodology, it's important to make sure that if we're asking them to change some of their practice, that we're aligning that to how we are spending time with them, whether that be in professional development time or giving them release time. Leading right into this next component. So one of the ways that I provide time for teachers is by releasing a department or a team for a half day so that they can actually take that time they need to create these project-based learning units. Initially, it takes a little bit more time to plan this way because they simply aren't used to thinking through this instructional methodology. It will become a more typical way of planning for teachers. So over time, this actually will not take more time. However, initially it may. And so make sure you've got structured planning time. One of the pitfalls that I made in initially starting off this with my staff was giving them planning time, but not having it be structured. So be sure to have an expected set of outcomes for teachers if you are giving them release time so that you can make sure that day stays focused. Also, I always provide instructional support now for my teachers. I found that just giving them release time without the support sometimes resulted in project-based learning designs that did not implement the 8 essential elements, and so the projects simply did not have the impact that we hoped for. One way that I can also give teachers time is through Community Circle. I have a very small school, so I was able to keep my 500-600 kiddos on my own and release the entire faculty. So the faculty would report to work 15 minutes early, and as the kids came to school, they would all join me in the cafeteria, or we would do a once-a-month assembly to do all the different little bits and pieces that we sometimes need to do at the primary level. Things like the anti-bullying talks and student recognition ceremonies, things like that. So we would schedule that for once a month. The faculty would have time to work as an entire team to make sure that they were articulating projects across grade levels and across disciplines, and then I would have the students for a little while. So the most important thing that I would say about time is you know your context, you know your staff, and so just be creative in how you can support them in getting the time that they need. All right, next is selective abandonment. So what are you going to have your teachers stop doing? We often just give more and more here in our public education arena, and we rarely stop doing something. So I highly recommend that you take a look at your initiatives, at the tasks that you're asking your staff to do, and then ask yourself the really tough question: if we're going to start something that's important, how can we ensure that there is focus on this important goal by taking something off the plate? And for us, one of the things we took off the plate were some portfolio writing assessments that the faculty simply wasn't using to guide their instruction. All right. Now, I've found that our most effective professional development is coaching and facilitating the instructional dialogue. I have, for the last decade, always been a principal on my own. I've never had any kind of instructional support staff or an assistant principal. So I've always had the opportunity to be a coach, and it's actually the part of the job that I find the most compelling. So I would encourage you to get in there and be that coach with your teachers. Even if you are not a project-based learning expert, you still can facilitate their dialogue. You can make sure they're staying on target. And I think most importantly, you can be side by side with them and be learning with them. One great resource for coaching materials is the book Coaching Conversations by Marcetta Riley, if you're interested in that. And also Educational Leadership Magazine pretty recently had an edition that was just focused on coaching. And ASCD, which I believe they call Learning Forward now, also has some great material on that.
Okay, so to tag on with the coaching, what does facilitation look like within our staffs to promote the dialogues that need to happen for instructional change within our staff? Tuning protocols are critical for creating a safe and constructive environment for the type of practice, the change of practice we want to see at our sites. And research shows this, that the power protocols are essential in supporting improvement initiatives. They're a non-threatening way for peers to coach each other within a staff. They provide a highly structured holding space that gives invaluable feedback. And we use the tuning protocol, which can also be called critical friends. Some of you may have heard of that or used it, to help teachers refine a project before working on it with kids. So often your teachers it'll be the first time that they've developed a unit using project-based learning elements, and prior to launching the classroom, it's very important to bring these ideas to the staff for feedback, for collective feedback, so that we can tune these protocols, refine them, make them stronger, and also share with each other across our classrooms in terms of what we're doing, so that we can provide support and assets. There are many protocols in addition to critical friends, including charrette protocols, student work analysis protocols, problem-solving protocols. An excellent resource is NSRF, the National School Reform Faculty, has a website with a huge database of protocols that can be effective for promoting these types of conversations.
All right, and classroom observations are just another way that you can provide your staff with some feedback as they're moving forward with this practice, because your teachers do legitimately want and need some feedback about this work. What you see on your screen now is our PBL classroom observation log, and this is just one way that we use to have some look-fors. We actually, at my school, we filled this out a little bit more and actually turned it into an innovation configuration map, so that we created a rubric so that you could have more of a scale. But I think the important component here is that the idea is that we're going in multiple times, and also this is not something that I would fill out in terms of their evaluation. This is something that I would fill out to give them feedback about their current practice, and more importantly, this is something that other teachers would support teachers by filling it out for them. So this is truly about growth, and again, making it crystal clear what those look-fors are in this instructional practice, because you're much more likely to see that in play when you're really concrete about what teachers should be doing. So let's take a step back. We have inundated you with information, and so I am wondering if you have any questions for the group at this point in time, or if there is something else that you wish that we would cover in these last few moments together. I know that it can be kind of a challenge to figure out at what point in time do we say to that individual who is not moving this project-based learning practice forward that they simply have to. And what I would say to you is that's why I've created some timelines regarding what stage we would be implementing at what point in time. And in those timelines are some very clear-cut expectations. So although the feedback does not begin as anything but just feedback to improve your practice, at some point in time when we have someone who's just outright refusing, we do go ahead and provide them with a little bit more direction. And we've got someone asking about, do we use the PBL pedagogical approach when we teach or coach teachers? What a great question, Kim. Yes, this is all about modeling. So in order to lead project-based learning at your school site, you simply have to model these behaviors. So, and actually Rody is a pro at modeling these behaviors, especially in staff meetings and PD. So I'm actually gonna let Rody answer this question for you. He has some amazing examples.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for the question, and that goes back to the early part of the webinar when we reinterpreted the 8 essential elements of project-based learning into a leadership construct or leadership framework, and in part that's partly due to the fact that teachers teach the way they are taught, right? And it's important for us to model the behaviors we expect them to implement in their classroom. So often this manifests during staff collaboration or staff meetings, that we operate the way we want our teachers to operate in the classroom. So how do we use a driving question as a school if we expect them to use a driving question in their classroom? How do we create need to knows for our teachers? How do we create a culture of inquiry? And in the end, what that does is it creates a broader culture of project-based learning throughout the program. We call it the parallel process. So the way teachers learn when we're together is very PBL-esque, as is the way students learn in the classroom. So a lot of it has to do with creating that culture of PBL that permeates every element of our operation, and intends to be very successful that way, so that old school leadership styles do not contradict or confuse teachers who are expected to do something different in the classroom. Okay, and if you have any other questions, please include those in the chat box. Something else we'd like to show to you, and I referred this to some folks in the chat box, that the Buck Institute for Education website has a plethora of resources, including professional development opportunities, but not only that, but resources themselves. So teachers can be directed there. You can direct teachers there for the starter kit, for the handbook. There are free resources, including rubrics, assessment tools, all kinds of stuff, materials that lend to project-based learning. So please check that out, and you can see what's available to kind of get the ball rolling if you're in the initial stages of implementation. There's also a fantastic project library search engine on the homepage there, and that's a good way to get the juices flowing if you're supporting teachers in developing projects. Many projects have already been developed across this country, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel when there are so many out there to either use or to spark new ideas within your staff. And finally, we'd like to not only hear from you, but invite you to be a part of the broader national discussion on project-based learning and what implementation has been like, or to ask questions about what it might be like, or questions that you have during implementation. So there are a variety of forums. We have our Edmodo group. If you're not familiar with Edmodo, it's a learning management system. We have a huge group on Edmodo of well over 8,500 teachers and PBL educators who use this as a social network for project-based learning. We have our Twitter and our YouTube channel that are also great resources for project-based learning. Finally, if you have any questions for either me or Jen, here is our contact information, Rody@bie.org and Jennifer@bie.org. We would be happy to answer any individual questions you might have, and we'd also be happy to share any resources we have. Not only do we create a transparent organization at our site, but we want to be transparent in all our practices with everyone who's part of the movement. So we'd be happy to share with you. So thank you very much. I hope this was beneficial, and again, feel free to contact us, and good luck with your project-based learning rollout.
Thanks again to all of you for participating, and also thanks for your questions. And if you do have anything else that you have questions about, please do contact us. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day, and best to you in your project-based learning implementation.